It started like any ordinary morning, perhaps even more stressful than usual. The alarm didn't go off on time, the traffic was worse than expected, and everything felt rushed. You know those days where nothing seems to go right? This was one of them. There was barely enough time to grab a piece of toast, let alone look presentable. The plan was simple: get to the office, survive the morning meeting, and then maybe breathe. But fate had a very different plan, one that wasn't written in the diary or programmed into the calendar. Stepping out into the chaos of the city, everything felt loud and overwhelming. People rushed past, heads down, coffee cups in hand, lost in their own worlds. The usual shortcut through the park was closed, meaning a detour through an unfamiliar street. Annoying, sure, but sometimes life sends you on the wrong road to get you exactly where you're meant to be. A phone call came in, one of those quick work-related updates that somehow left a sense of unease. Walking a bit too fast while half listening and half thinking, a sudden thump came out of nowhere, shoulder bumped into someone hard. Papers flew. A coffee cup tilted dangerously, sending its contents splattering across the pavement. There was a moment of stunned silence, the kind that only happens when two strangers crash into each other at full speed on a sidewalk. And for a second, the world stood still. Apologies were exchanged instantly. The tone was polite, but underneath it, both people were flustered. The day had already begun poorly for both, but oddly enough, neither walked away. There was something about the encounter, a feeling, maybe, a pause, a glance, an invisible string tugging gently, inviting just a moment more. It was supposed to be just that, an apology, maybe a smile, and then continue on the day. But instead, a simple "Are you all right?" turned into a small conversation, and that small conversation turned into the idea of grabbing another coffee, this time voluntarily. After all, the one just spilled was a sad loss for both caffeine and dignity. They found a small cafe tucked between a flower shop and a bookstore, a place neither had noticed before despite passing this street countless times. It was quiet, warm, and smelled of cinnamon and fresh bread. The noise of the world outside faded the moment they stepped in, and that's when the unexpected really began. Conversations with strangers are usually polite and short, but this one flowed easily, like they had known each other longer than just 5 minutes. They spoke about work, but not too much, about music, awkward childhood memories, and the stress of the daily grind. They laughed at things that didn't seem particularly funny, and found comfort in the shared frustrations of life. That rushed, chaotic morning had led to something calm, something simple, something good. Time slipped by unnoticed. The phone, once a source of constant checking and anxiety, lay untouched on the table. The meeting missed, not ideal, but somehow it didn't feel important anymore. What mattered was this moment, this unexpected detour from the usual path. There was no plan for this. It wasn't written in any to-do list or appointment. But here it was, a moment of connection born out of spilled coffee, frustration, and an unexpected change in direction. And maybe that's the lesson hiding beneath the surface. Sometimes the best things happen when everything else goes wrong. A rushed morning, a random street, a stranger's smile, and the courage to stay just a little longer. Sometimes life doesn't need a perfect setup. Sometimes it just needs two people willing to pause and see what happens next. And just like that, in the middle of a moment that felt entirely off balance, someone appeared. Not dramatically, not like in the movies with wind blowing through a scarf or some magical music playing in the background. No, it was ordinary, almost forgettable if it weren't for the strange way time seemed to slow down. A stranger, just standing there, looking a bit confused, possibly just as rushed and out of place as I felt. It wasn't supposed to be a moment that meant anything. After all, how many people do we pass every day without a second thought? On buses, in coffee shops, at traffic lights. Hundreds of faces that blur into the background. But sometimes, for reasons we don't fully understand, one of those faces stands out, and not because they're extraordinary, but because they arrive at a moment where you feel like you're barely holding yourself together, and suddenly they're just there. I remember thinking how strange it was to notice someone's presence that much, not in the way of looks or charm, but in the timing. It was the kind of day where you didn't really want to talk to anyone, and yet here was this person unintentionally inviting a conversation with nothing more than an awkward smile and a simple "you okay?" Not the most poetic words in the world, but in that moment they were exactly what I needed to hear. And maybe that's the thing about people. Sometimes it's not about the grand gestures or perfect lines. Sometimes it's just about someone showing up when they have no idea you needed them to. There was no introduction, no background story, just a few sentences shared over the awkward cleanup of a minor sidewalk disaster. But instead of walking away, they stayed, and I stayed, and that staying, that tiny decision not to disappear into the noise of the world, changed everything. I can't explain why it felt easy to speak. Maybe because the morning had already gone so terribly wrong that nothing worse could happen. Or maybe because some part of me quietly hoped that something, anything, would go unexpectedly right. Whatever the reason, this stranger stood there with patience, not pushing conversation, not making it awkward, just present, listening, responding, existing in a way that felt calming without trying to be. It was clear we were both a bit out of rhythm with the day. Plans had fallen apart, moods weren't perfect, and we both had that slightly rumpled, real-world look of people who had stopped caring how they appeared. And in that honesty, something rare happened. We were real with each other from the very beginning. There was no pretense to impress, no performance, just two people, slightly lost, slightly late, and suddenly, not alone. The most interesting thing about a stranger is that they come without any expectations of you. They don't know your story, your past mistakes, your weird habits. They don't know what kind of week you've had or what you're anxious about. They just meet you exactly as you are in that moment. And if you're lucky, like I was that day, they meet you with kindness. We didn't talk about anything earth-shattering. In fact, most of it was small talk at first, about how cold it had suddenly gotten, or how the cafe down the street had the best almond croissants, even though neither of us liked almonds. But the longer we spoke, the more something in the air shifted. You know, when someone is genuinely listening, really, truly listening, not waiting for their turn to speak, not looking over your shoulder at their phone, just locked into the moment with you. That kind of listening is rare, and I felt it. It didn't feel like we were strangers anymore, not entirely. There was a comfort that came from being understood, even briefly. And I realized how much we all crave that connection that doesn't have to be earned or proven, just experienced. What started as an awkward bump and an unexpected pause had turned into something meaningful, and maybe that's the point. Maybe the universe knows when you need someone, even if just for an hour or an afternoon or a conversation you didn't see coming. Because sometimes the right person shows up at exactly the wrong moment, and it turns out to be the best thing that could have happened. It's funny how something as small as bumping into someone can shift the entire course of a day. What starts as a moment of frustrations, spilled coffee, flustered apologies, awkward glances, can somehow become something else entirely. An accident, nothing more, just two people who weren't looking where they were going. And yet, that clumsy little meeting did something unexpected. It opened the door to laughter, real laughter, the kind that escapes before you have the chance to hold it in, the kind that makes you forget for a moment how bad your morning was. At first, it was just the obvious things, laughing at how ridiculous the situation looked from the outside. Two adults scrambling to pick up scattered papers, one of us dripping coffee, both trying to act like everything was under control when clearly it wasn't. And it wasn't staged or planned, which made it better, because in that chaos there was honesty. There was something undeniably human about it all. I remember one of us made a comment about how we looked like a walking disaster. Maybe both of us did, honestly, and that was it. Something cracked open, a barrier dropped. The kind of social mask we usually wear around strangers just faded, because somehow we weren't strangers in the way that usually means. We were two people caught in the same little mess, and for a moment it felt like the universe had pressed pause on everything else. We ended up sitting on a bench nearby, half out of convenience, half because neither of us really wanted to rush off anymore. And the conversation just continued, not forced, not polite small talk for the sake of being nice, but the kind of talking that made the minutes slip by unnoticed. There was laughter over mutual clumsiness, a few light jokes about how we probably scared every passerby with our chaotic energy, and slowly that laughter made space for something else, comfort. It was strange how quickly comfort settled in. There was no need to explain too much, just simple things. Where were you headed? What do you do? Do you always crash into people on Tuesdays? Silly stuff that turned into stories, and stories that made us laugh again. But this time it wasn't about the accident. It was about the fact that we could sit there, two strangers only an hour ago, and find something to share. Maybe that's the beauty of accidental meetings. They catch you off guard. They pull you out of your routine and into a moment that feels spontaneous and real. There's no script, no expectations, just two people figuring it out in real time, and sometimes that's exactly the space where something genuine can grow. And laughter, more than anything, has a way of connecting people. It bridges the awkward silences, softens the nervous edges, and says, "Hey, I'm enjoying this, you're okay." That kind of connection doesn't need big declarations or deep conversations, not right away. Sometimes it just needs shared smiles, and the feeling that you're both in on something no one else really understands. A small secret between two people who didn't mean to meet, but somehow did. I didn't expect to laugh that day. I didn't expect to feel at ease, and I certainly didn't expect to feel seen, really seen, by someone who hadn't even existed in my day a couple of hours before. But there we were, laughing over nothing and everything, like we'd known each other longer than the short time we'd shared. It's amazing how quickly connection can happen when we let go of how things are supposed to go. If I'd stormed off after the bump, or if they'd just muttered an apology and walked away, that would have been it. Just another forgettable moment in a forgettable day. But instead, something else happened, something we didn't plan, and that accident, that tiny interruption to our busy routines, became the beginning of a story neither of us saw coming. Sometimes it doesn't take years or even weeks to feel a spark with someone. Sometimes all it takes is one shared laugh in the middle of a chaotic day to remind you that connection can be as simple as letting the moment unfold. We ended up at this little cafe not because it was part of a plan, but because it was the nearest place that didn't feel too loud, too crowded, or too cold. One of those tucked away spots you never really notice until you're looking for somewhere to breathe. It had tall windows, polished brass light fixtures, and that warm smell of roasted coffee beans and fresh pastries drifting through the air. Everything inside felt soft, gentle lighting, calm voices, tiny clinks of spoons stirring drinks. The kind of place that immediately makes you exhale a little without realizing it. It wasn't fancy in the flashy, over-the-top way, but it had a certain charm. Marble tables, velvet chairs, handwritten menus on chalkboards. The kind of place you might pass a dozen times and think maybe next time. But that day we stepped inside together, and it felt like time was asking us to pause, just for a moment, just to see what could happen if we did. We ordered coffee, one regular, one something slightly ridiculous with oat milk and a sprinkle of cinnamon. And we laughed about the difference. We sat by the window watching the world move on without us, and for once that felt okay. There was no rush to check our phones, no guilt about the time ticking by. Just coffee in our hands and a conversation that kept surprising me. I don't even remember how the topic shifted from the weather to childhood memories, or how it jumped from favorite films to little regrets we usually keep to ourselves. It all flowed so naturally, without any sense of trying too hard. And somewhere between the first sip and the last drop, there was something else building. That quiet, indescribable feeling that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't just a coincidence. It wasn't a loud chemistry. Nothing dramatic, no sparks flying, no background music swelling, just glances held a little longer than usual, smiles that lingered, that tiny moment when your hand brushes against someone else's by accident, and neither of you pulls away immediately. You feel it in the way the conversation doesn't run out, in the way both of you lean in just a little, even without realizing it, that soft pull, that subtle click, that unspoken, "Are you feeling this too?" I don't think either of us expected it. We were just trying to recover from a chaotic morning. But life has a strange way of handing you moments you didn't even know you needed. And there we were, in a café we hadn't planned to visit, sharing a table, 2 drinks, and a rhythm that felt almost rehearsed even though it wasn't. What struck me most wasn't what we said. It was how easy it was to say it. There was something about being in that setting, out of the noise of the street and the pressure of the day, that made everything softer. You start to notice the little things, like how they smiled slightly before answering, or how they tilted their head when they listened, genuinely listened. And slowly those small details began to matter more than anything I had been worried about earlier. We stayed longer than we meant to. 1 cup of coffee turned into 2. The conversation stretched like Sunday afternoons, unhurried and content. Around us, people came and went. The barista cleaned the counter for the 3rd time, and yet we were still there, still talking, still discovering pieces of each other in the quiet comfort of a shared space. It's strange to think how easy it is to miss people like this, how often we pass by someone who could matter. But that day, something slowed us down just enough to notice, to sit, to talk, and without either of us saying it directly, we both knew we didn't want the moment to end just yet. Chemistry isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a shared smile over a foam heart on a latte. Sometimes it's laughing at how your orders couldn't be more different. Sometimes it's just sitting across from someone in a cafe you've never been to before and realizing you're already hoping it won't be the last time. And maybe that's the magic of it all, not the coffee, not the place, but the unexpected feeling that something beautiful might just be beginning. At first, everything felt awkward. That uncomfortable kind of silence that hangs in the air after an unexpected moment. Like the universe pressed pause and no one quite knew what to do next. The kind of awkward that makes you overly aware of your hands, your words, your posture. Sitting across from someone you technically don't know, yet somehow feel strangely pulled toward. There were pauses in the conversation, glances that flickered away too quickly, and a nervous laugh or two to fill the empty spaces. And honestly, I wasn't sure where it was going, whether it would fizzle out after 5 minutes of polite, small talk or drift into that forgettable category we label as just another random encounter. But then something shifted. And not because either of us said anything profound or groundbreaking. It happened in the little things, the way we both noticed the same awkwardly placed painting above the cafe counter and made the exact same expression of confusion. The way one of us reached for the sugar pot and the other handed it over at the exact same moment without even asking. That tiny unspoken rhythm began to grow. Slowly, gently, and almost without realizing it, we started to relax. I think part of it was the realization that we didn't need to impress each other. There was no performance here, no need to act cool or funny or clever. We had already seen each other at our least polished. After all, nothing strips away your image faster than a clumsy sidewalk collision and spilled coffee, and in that shared vulnerability the pressure lifted. We weren't trying to be anything, we were just being. And once that happened, the conversation became less about what to say and more about what we wanted to share. We started talking about the weirdness of growing older, about the expectations we put on ourselves, and the moments when we feel like we're falling behind. There was laughter, real laughter, but it came from a place of understanding, not from trying to be entertaining. And in between the light-hearted moments, there were soft, thoughtful ones too. Stories that hinted at fears, mistakes, tiny regrets. Things we usually tuck away, but for some reason felt safe enough to speak about. And maybe that's what made the whole thing feel so heartwarming. It wasn't just about two people talking. It was about two people letting each other in, one small moment at a time. Every awkward pause became a bridge to something more honest. Every nervous smile turned into a more relaxed one, and all the walls that usually stay up around strangers, they began to lower brick by brick. It wasn't about being perfect or charming. It was about being present, really present, and it's rare these days to sit across from someone and feel like they're actually there with you, not scrolling on their phone, not waiting for the next distraction, but fully, quietly, attentively there. That kind of presence is a gift, and when someone gives it to you without asking for anything in return, it leaves an impression. Before we knew it, that awkwardness that started everything had completely melted away. In its place, there was something gentle and kind, a warmth that came not from the coffee or the lighting or the setting, but from the unexpected connection between two people who didn't mean to meet but chose to stay. And in choosing to stay, even just for a while, something beautiful happened. Sometimes we underestimate how quickly emotions can change, how a moment of discomfort can turn into comfort if we're just patient enough, if we give things the space to unfold naturally without rushing or forcing them. That day taught me that warmth doesn't need time to build. It only needs truth and a little willingness to be seen. Because when we drop the act, when we stop worrying about how we come across, something real can happen, and that realness, unguarded, simple, sincere, is where the heart finds its way in. It's strange, isn't it? How we spend so much time planning for the perfect moments, perfect nights out, perfect conversations, perfect first impressions. We map things out, rehearse our lines in our heads, pick the right outfits, and hope everything will go just the way we imagined. But sometimes life gives us something completely different, something we didn't prepare for, didn't dress for, didn't expect, and somehow it ends up meaning more than all those polished, carefully arranged moments ever could. That day wasn't supposed to be anything special. In fact, it started as a bit of a mess. Running late, stressed, juggling too many thoughts at once. Not the kind of day that leaves room for anything remotely romantic. If anything, it was the kind of day where you just want to get through it and forget it happened. But then, out of nowhere, something shifted, a collision, literally, and a stranger who wasn't part of the plan. A few awkward minutes, a spilled coffee, and a quiet decision to slow down for just a moment. No expectations, no pressure, just a pause. We didn't call it a date, not out loud. There were no grand gestures, no table reserved in advance, no getting ready beforehand. But as the time passed and we sat there talking over drinks in a little cafe neither of us had intended to visit, it started to feel like something more than just a chance meeting, not because of what we did, but because of how it felt. Easy, natural, unexpected, yes, but in the best possible way. There's a kind of freedom in unplanned moments, because when there's no pressure to impress, you can just be yourself. When the timing is off and nothing is polished, that's when people tend to show up more honestly. There's nothing to hide behind, no script to follow, and that creates space for something real to happen. That's exactly what it felt like, real. Two people who didn't know each other an hour ago, suddenly laughing like old friends and discovering small pieces of each other with every sentence. I think that's what makes an unplanned date so special. It doesn't need to live up to an image in your head. It doesn't need to follow a routine or hit all the right milestones. It just exists in its own little world for as long as you both choose to stay in it. There's something kind of magical about that, the spontaneity, the openness, the surprise of finding connection where you least expect it. At some point, I remember looking across the table and thinking, I'm actually enjoying this. Not in a loud or overwhelming way, but quietly, genuinely, and I couldn't help but smile at the fact that none of it had been planned. If someone had told me that morning that I'd end up spending my afternoon in a cozy cafe, laughing with a stranger and feeling oddly calm in their company, I probably would have laughed. But there I was, and it felt right in a way that no perfectly organized date ever had. We weren't trying to impress each other. We were just paying attention, listening, laughing, allowing the moment to unfold without trying to control it. And in doing so, something tender emerged, a kind of trust that only comes from being fully present with someone, from knowing they're not there for any reason other than they want to be. So many of us chase big moments, thinking that's where love or connection will bloom. But sometimes the best stories start in the in-between places, in the missed buses, the detours, the little messes that life throws at us. And sometimes the people who mean the most show up not when we're ready, but when we're open, even if we don't realize it at the time. That unexpected afternoon didn't come with a promise or a label. It didn't need one. What it gave instead was something better, the simple, quiet joy of discovering someone new and being seen just as I was, without anything forced or polished. It reminded me that not every beautiful moment needs to be planned. Some of them just happen, and those are often the ones we remember most. And so, what began as just another rushed morning slowly unfolded into something completely unexpected. A simple accident, a stranger at the right place and time, a spontaneous conversation over coffee, and suddenly the rhythm of the day changed. The awkwardness turned into laughter, the silence became connection, and that unplanned pause transformed into a memory I'll never forget. Sometimes we spend so much time chasing the right moments, the perfect settings, the carefully crafted plans, but life, real life, often has better ideas. It gives us surprises. And in those surprises, in the people we weren't expecting, and the moments we didn't schedule, we sometimes find the most honest versions of ourselves. That day didn't start out beautifully, but it became beautiful because of its simplicity, its spontaneity, and the quiet truth it carried. That the best connections don't always come with preparation. They come with presence. So if you ever find yourself in the middle of a messy, unplanned moment, pause, look around, you never know. Your best story might be just about to begin. Thank you.